Hey folks, it's Rod with Power Group. Welcome back on The Pursuit of Wealth, your home for MJ stocks, crypto assets, and interviews. Today is Tuesday, August 23rd, 2022. Hope you're well. And with me today is Morgan Fox, the political director at NORML. Morgan, welcome. And I just want to thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I know you're busy, so we'll try to keep today's stream short and sweet, doing a little bit of a different format so anybody can tune in. If anybody does have any questions, I see we have some people joining us now, so welcome. If you could smash a like, subscribe, help support me in the channel. It doesn't cost you anything. If you're new, you can subscribe, click the bell, and you'll be notified on any future videos or when I go live. So we'll get started. We'll start on a more personal note here. Morgan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and where did you grow up?
Sure. So I was born and raised in the Cleveland suburbs, and went to college nearby, just across the river at Case Western, and shortly thereafter got involved in cannabis policy professionally.
Okay, cool. And can you tell us a little bit about NORML? Could you maybe expand a little bit on your personal role as the political director there, what that entails?
Sure. So NORML is the world's oldest and largest cannabis policy reform organization, started in 1970. And we operate primarily as a consumer lobby, protecting the rights of cannabis consumers at both the federal and state level. And my role as political director is primarily focused on federal policy, namely ending prohibition at the federal level and doing so in a way that helps support state level efforts to do the same and that undoes the harms associated with prohibition in the United States. We do have some international chapters as well, but my work is primarily focused on the U.S. Congress.
Okay, yeah, that was another one of my questions as well. So it's not just isolated to the U.S. You guys have, what other countries do you guys engage with?
We've got a few chapters in Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Europe.
Okay, cool.
Not nearly as much active work that we do at the organization, but we try to support our international chapters as much as we possibly can through educational information and resources, especially in terms of the knowledge base that people can use to be more effective advocates in their home countries.
Okay, that's a great explanation. Thank you for that. So how did you get involved in the MJ space? Is that something that's been a passion of yours? Like, how exactly did you get involved in MJ, and how did you end up at NORML?
Well, I was a cannabis consumer late in high school. It's probably a little earlier than we'd recommend anybody consume cannabis, but I actually got involved in advocacy work primarily because of my unfortunate introduction to the criminal justice system because of my cannabis consumption. I got popped for possession a couple of times, and while I was personally very annoyed that I was dealing with these the consequences, and especially the collateral consequences of an arrest, even without doing any jail time for these violations. The thing that really galvanized me was when I was going to court, I would see people with the exact same charges and the exact same history as me, but who didn't look like me, getting way bigger sentences. And we're talking about the same courtroom, same day, same judge. So sentencing disparity is really what brought me into the space in an advocate paradigm, and has been one of the major driving factors of my work in this space since that time. So then after I graduated college, I got the opportunity to intern for the Marijuana Policy Project, and then spent the next 10 years there, eventually leaving as their director of communications. Moved over to the National Cannabis Industry Association for almost 4 years as their media relations director. And then in January, transferred over to National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws, with a little bit of a pivot away from communications and more towards direct advocacy and lobbying.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I mean, there's been a lot of people harmed from the war on drugs, and I personally think that it's something that has to end. I don't think anybody should have to go to jail for something, maybe simple possession. But no, I appreciate you sharing that side of the story with us, and with everybody that's joining the live stream. And I know, I consider myself a pioneer in the MJ space, and I really am a big advocate, and I'm going to be here for decades, supporting this amazing industry that we have. But how can we, the public, push legislators, and how can we support NORML from an investor or just a regular, person, a retail investor sort of deal?
Well, honestly, the best way to support legalization efforts is to A, contact your lawmakers, and B, donate to groups that are doing the on the ground work that have the history and the political acumen and the experience within this space. There are a lot of companies out there that are starting to do their own lobbying work, and oftentimes they end up hiring lobbying firms that have zero experience in the space. So by financially supporting the work of groups like NORML and others that have been doing this for decades and have deep knowledge and deep connections with the political players involved is really one of the best ways that you can really support legalization and bring about sensible cannabis policies, both in the U.S. and internationally. But when it comes down to political advocacy, citizen lobbying is really one of the best things that you can do, whether that's in person or whether that's just simply writing a letter or using NORML's website to be able to contact your lawmakers in the United States. We don't necessarily have the tools set up to do that internationally yet, but one day hopefully we will once we get a little bit farther down the road here domestically.
Yeah, that was another question. So I'll paste that in there if anybody does want to donate to the cause. I know I'll be doing it myself. But you said not internationally. So is this only to Americans only, or Canadians or anybody else abroad able to donate as well?
Oh, anybody can donate.
Anybody can donate? Okay.
In terms of like setting up methods where one can easily contact their lawmakers, we only really have that capability set up for the United States.
Right.
At some point, we'd like to extend that more broadly, but even though we are still one of the biggest, if not the biggest, cannabis policy reform organization in the United States, we're still a relatively small nonprofit, the people that are working in this space are traditionally way underfunded compared to the people that are trying to push the status quo or continue to support prohibition policies. So every little bit helps.
Right. Okay. Now, I thought maybe a couple people might have been confused, so I just wanted to clear that up. And then in terms of your advisory board, I was looking at the advisory board and I was quite impressed with that. You got tons of people on there. If we just take a quick peek here, you got Willie Nelson, obviously one of the ones that stood out to me. You've also got Woody Harrelson, and the list goes on, but that's just a few there. But how exactly, like what value do those members bring, and what role do they play on the advisory board? Like what do they bring to the table at NORML?
Well, spreading the word to their admittedly gigantic audiences about the sort of work that NORML does and has been doing for decades, as well as trying to add their cultural cachet to the work that we're doing, and is really invaluable support.
100%. Okay, cool. And what's NORML's position on large public companies who want to get involved in the MJ space? Will they, essentially gobble up all of the small entrepreneurs, and the small businesses, in your opinion?
Well, that's a major concern. NORML is a consumer advocacy. So, we're really looking out for what is best going to support consumer desires and consumer interests. And consumer interests really run the entire gamut, from people who are very, very interested in exactly where their cannabis is sourced from and want to support small businesses, to people who really only care about exactly how much it's going to hit their pocketbook. But in general, that's definitely a concern that we have. And I think that, very much like the way that the craft beer industry works in the United States, there are certainly going to be, big multinational corporations involved in this post-federal legalization. And there is also going to be a huge market share that is promoting small craft producers. We want to make sure that we promote policies that are the absolute best for consumers. So that means making sure that we create a regulatory structure and a tax structure that does not only benefit big operators and that allows small operators to survive, but that makes cannabis across the board less expensive for consumers everywhere.
Yeah, and we've seen people in Congress support the idea that they didn't want big alcohol, big tobacco to come in to dominate the space. So what are your thoughts on that potential of big alcohol and tobacco companies dominating this space? If, as much as you try not to, do you think it's kind of an inevitability at some point?
I mean, it's absolutely not inevitable, particularly because we actually still have a lot of opportunity to be able to craft these policies, since they are still a long way from getting passed in Congress. But also at the state level, there are a number of things that we can do to try to encourage the viability of small businesses and avoid things like monopolies or oligopolies in the space.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, having a lot of choices and a lot of options, both in terms of the companies that are offering them, but also the products that they're offering, is beneficial to consumers. So, we have a lot of leeway right now to be able to shape exactly what that industry looks like and make sure that there is a lot of opportunity for actors of all sizes in the space. Without being overly protectionist or creating a situation where cannabis is overly expensive for consumers for the long term. What exactly that looks like, I think, is still very much up for debate, and that is becoming a more and more robust debate the closer we get to federal legalization in the U.S.
Right. Okay, that's great. That's great insight. Thank you for that. And moreover, on the topic of public companies, do you work with those public companies, and to what extent? Like, do you offer education, communication, or financial support of any kind?
Well, we don't offer financial support to individual companies, and we really don't take in a lot of money at all from any other private interests. It's mostly individual $5 and $10 donors. There are just a lot of them, but we are happy to work with pretty much anybody that is actively working in the space to make sure that they have the most accurate and up-to-date information, and to make sure that they're promoting policies that are going to be beneficial to consumers.
100%. Yeah, everybody working towards a common goal, so to speak, right?
Absolutely.
And another personal question. I'm not sure if you can answer this, but are you personally allowed to own MJ stocks while working at NORML or lobbying state and federal legislators?
There are no federal laws in place stating that you can't, and in many places that's considered a confluence of interest instead of a conflict of interest. The problem arises when it might be considered a conflict that you would be pushing policies that might be beneficial to one segment of the industry versus another, or that might be more beneficial to the industry versus the consumer. So that's definitely something that people working in the space have to consider if they are thinking about purchasing cannabis stocks on public markets.
100%. And you mentioned federal legalization as we move closer towards that. With the midterms approaching on November 8th, do you think MJ legalization will be in the spotlight during these elections? We know that the Democrats got put into office. A lot of it had to do, they got control of the Senate. A lot of that had to do with the promises around, and the hopes around MJ reform. But we haven't really seen anything on that front yet. Do you think that'll kind of take the reins leading into those elections? And could 2023 be a turnaround year for MJ stocks, in your opinion?
Well, I think the stocks question is an entirely different one. But in terms of the issue becoming a hot button politically, that's something that we absolutely want to try to promote as much as possible, because it's got majority support across party lines. It really only starts to get dicey when you start looking at older age demographics. So we want to try to get out as much youth voter turnout as possible, who have a lot more experience with cannabis and haven't had the same amount of non-evidence-based anti-drug propaganda shoved down their throats for decades. But I think that when you're looking at the midterm elections, it's going to be a little bit of a tightrope, because back in 2020, the vote for the MORE Act in Congress was actually put off until after the election, because I think some people were worried about it having a negative backlash among voters. We didn't see that at all, and we haven't seen that in subsequent elections. So I think that it would be vital to try to make this a much bigger issue for either party if they're trying to stay in power. Now, whether or not they will do so, I think remains to be seen. And I think the fact that there has been relative inaction on this issue, with the exception of the introduction of comprehensive legislation and the passage of a relatively limited research bill in the Senate, as well as in the House, that it might be an issue that they don't necessarily want to make a frontline issue, because they haven't accomplished as much as a lot of voters may have wanted them to. But at the same time, there is a significant portion of the voting demographic that actually really wants to see progress in this area. It might not necessarily be the top priority issue, but it's something that they do want to see, and it's low-hanging fruit for anybody that wants to see their position get bumped up a couple of points in the polls.
Yeah.
I absolutely think that we're going to see that. And I also think that it's quite possible that we might see movement on some more incremental legislation in Congress before the midterms. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, there's something like, what, 25 legislative days left in the year or something like that?
Yeah, it's pretty limited. And the schedule is pretty packed until then.
Yeah.
So it's quite possible that any incremental legislation or combination of incremental bills will get put into the lame duck. But I would very much hope that it does not, because I think that it's a way for, basically lawmakers of any stripe to show the American people that they're actually capable of getting something done, even if it's incremental.
Right. Yeah, and there's a lot, there's other pressing issues. It's not just MJ that they have to deal with either, right? If you look at, on this channel, I myself specialize in MJ stocks first and foremost, but then crypto assets. And if you take a look at the stablecoin regulations, things like that, there's also, a lot of crypto talk and safe harbor. There's talks of, some other bills that are coming through, but mostly the focus is going to be on stable coins, I think, right?
Well, when it comes to the market in terms of public investment, one thing I've noticed over the years is that individual investors and institutional investors tend to get overly excited about the potential for the quote unquote green rush without understanding not only the political environment that we're in right now and the legal environment that cannabis exists in, but also are just expecting short-term, immediate returns on their investments. And this is much more of a long-haul situation. And something else that I would suggest to investors is don't limit yourself to publicly listed companies. Really look at the smaller companies that don't have access to capital and aren't able to be publicly listed yet. And there are thousands of them.
Yeah. That's a good point.
There are a lot of trade associations and services out there that can help you introduce investors to smaller companies that much more desperately need capital infusion than the bigger companies, and really could be the future of this industry. And if you just think long term and don't entirely focus on short term investments for major publicly traded stock companies, there is just an untapped opportunity right there that I think is much, much larger than what you're going to get out of the few publicly traded companies that, quite frankly, are more interested in expansion than they are of solidifying their market profile.
100%. Yeah, that's a great point. And I know we're getting a little short on time, so I'll try to move through these a little quicker. But with regards to the bills moving through Congress at the moment, which one are you most excited about, and which one would you say has the better chance of passing? Either the more CAOA. We know that Apple and Microsoft are backing a Republican-led bill as well, and I think this time's different. But yeah, what are you most excited about, and what do you think has the most chance of getting passed?
Well, in terms of excitement, what I'm really excited about is a little bit more thematic as opposed to a specific bill. We're seeing more legislation and more discussion about legislation than we ever have before. This is the first Congress in which we've had Senate Majority leadership on the side of legalization and actively working towards it. In terms of what's most realistic, I don't think that we have the votes there for comprehensive reform that includes descheduling, but there is increasing support for incremental reform in some sort of a package that would include both, banking as well as social justice work, such as expungement and pardons, as well as both at the state and federal level, things like veterans access. There are a lot of pieces of the pie that we could take care of right now, at least in the short term, and then build upon later and help build momentum towards more comprehensive descheduling that, quite frankly, in terms of the Senate, is not going to get across the finish line this year. That being said, I am really excited about the legislation that we've seen from Senate Majority Leader Schumer in terms of the CAOA, as well as the legislation that we've seen on the House side from Nancy Mace.
Yeah.
Plus the fact that we saw the MORE Act pass for a second time in the current session. The fact that these bills are able to pass and that they're able to be introduced and discussed is monumental, and it really helps us grow the Overton window in terms of what cannabis policy could potentially look like. And in particular, looking at Nancy Mace's bill, States Reform Act, I think that really represents a raising the floor of where the GOP is willing to go on this issue.
Yeah.
That it includes expungement, it includes restorative justice measures, it includes civil protections. And not very long ago, we would not have seen that from a GOP-sponsored descheduling bill, or even really any solid descheduling language at all. Aside from a few very very clear like decrim descheduling bills. So I think that what we're seeing is an evolution on this topic, that people are on the Hill are much more knowledgeable about it and are much more willing to get into the details and to explore the very real facts of the harms that have been associated with cannabis policy reform, and start exploring ways to help undo those harms.
Totally. It definitely feels like the tides are shifting. And you mentioned safe banking. Do you think that's realistically, do you think that that's something that could pass by the end of the year, by the end of 2022?
I think it's very realistic that safe banking could pass if it is combined with things like expungement and veterans access. I don't necessarily see it passing on its own, because there would not be enough Democrat support for that. I don't see it passing with too much change to the initial language, because that could alienate the GOP support that's needed to beat the filibuster. But that being said, there are a number of suggestions and a number of ideas floating around right now in the halls of Congress on how to get as much included in a package of bills as possible that would do the most to ensure an inclusive and equitable industry and improve representation within the industry, as well as to undo the harms associated with unequal enforcement and start rolling back prohibition that don't quite extend to the level of descheduling, but are a move in the right direction, while we continue to work with lawmakers to show them that descheduling is not going to make the sky fall, and that the federal government, like every single state that has done so already, is capable of regulating the substance.
Yeah, 100%. And then I know we talked about monopolies and things like that, but furthermore, on the topic of regulatory framework, do you believe that licensed producers in Canada and other companies abroad, do you think that they'll be able to sell and ship products cross-border to the United States? Like, can we do that in a way that doesn't encourage big conglomerates to completely dominate the space? Do you think that's likely?
Well, the legislation that we've seen so far has not directly addressed this issue. So I think that would be something that would have to be dealt with after the fact, provided that one of the bills that's already been introduced is passed. That would be something that would have to be worked out between Treasury Department and the relevant federal regulatory agencies that would control the substance itself. Not only that, but also with individual state regulatory regimes.
Right.
So I think that that's something that is going to become much more prevalent in terms of the conversation around how we deschedule cannabis. But at this point, I think that the main focus is on interstate commerce.
Yeah.
And there are still a lot of ideas about exactly what that should look like. I think that there's a lot of legitimate concern that the dormant commerce clause will kick in, and that it would just be free reign, which could create a lot of headaches for not only individual state regulatory systems, but also for actors in individual states who have been trying to work within this very heavily regulated but individually state siloed system that we have in the United States, where the capital necessary to be able to expand into multi-state markets is not necessarily going to follow as quickly as the ability to operate across state lines, which would unfairly benefit larger operators that have more access to capital.
That makes sense. So basically, we're still early, and we can expect more on that front. Okay. And in Canada, excise taxes, that's been something that's really been hurting the bottom line for the licensed producers here. And it's, even 4 years after legalization, how important is it that Congress passed legislation that is focused on keeping those taxes low in your mind? I know Nancy Mace's bill, I think, was a little bit more favorable in terms of taxation compared to what we saw in previous bills. But could you expand on that?
Well, we want to have a tax rate that's going to be adequately able to fund restorative justice measures, but at the same time, especially with cannabis, where there is a pre-existing untaxed and unregulated market, by setting the taxes too high, you're really going to be dropping the amount of overall revenue that you can get, particularly in the long term. And I'm less worried about the bottom line of operators as I am about consumers and the
Right.
ability to displace the unregulated market, or at least replace it. So, we definitely want to set the tax rates federally as low as they possibly can, particularly when you consider the fact that every single one of these state licensed programs has pretty exorbitant tax rates, almost across the board. Not to mention all the other financial burdens that these businesses have in order to stay in compliance with state regulatory systems.
Right.
There is a significant portion of the cannabis consumer base that, for them, price is the number one concern. And if you are unable to be competitive with the existing unregulated market, we're not going to be able to displace that market. And we're still going to have a huge portion of the consumer base that decides to continue to patronize the unregulated market. And that lowers the overall tax revenue that we're going to see from the system. Not to mention all of the other health and safety problems that could potentially arise from the continuation of the unregulated market. So, I mean, from a consumer base, obviously we want consumers to be able to pay as little as possible and not be overtaxed. But from an overall implementation standpoint, lower taxes means greater tax revenue overall and more business opportunity for both small and large operators.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, thanks for that. And how important will New York be? I'm really excited for it, but how important do you think that that area is going to be? It's one of the biggest cities in the world. When recreational sales come online, how important is that going to be for our industry, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, just looking at the size of the market, it's definitely going to be huge. Not to mention the fact that New York has one of the most robust social equity programs in the country that we've seen so far, at least in
True,
theory.
yeah.
How it's implemented, I think, will really be the test. But from sort of a larger and a little bit more esoteric standpoint, New York is one of the economic and cultural centers of the world. And by having regulated cannabis sales in a place that has so much international tourism, you're able to kind of export those ideas more effectively, because people are going to come to New York for various tourism reasons or for business. They're going to see what an effective regulatory system looks like, and that you can do this and take those ideas back to their home country. So I think that it could be a watershed for cannabis policy reform globally.
Yeah, and this could be very well be a nice blueprint. It could be, from the state and federal level, a way to, really kind of gauge and a nice blueprint for the rest of the country once we see more reform in other state levels and federal level, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
At the very least, we're going to be talking about a massive drop in arrests, and we've already started to see that. So, from a consumer standpoint, that's our really number one concern is stopping people from getting arrested.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I'm on board with that 100%. Well, last question. We'll wrap it up. Do you believe Germany legalizing and possibly France? They've been mulling it over. Mexico as well. Do you think that's going to motivate the U.S. to pass some aspect of MJ reform in a more timely manner, or do you think they're really, not paying too much attention to what the outsiders are doing?
Well, I mean, the U.S. has always kind of had a history of paying attention to treaty obligations and things like that when it benefits them, and ignoring them when it doesn't. But I think they absolutely should be paying attention to this in terms of being left behind by the international market. And we're starting to see movement on basically every populated continent when it comes to cannabis policy reform, and the inability of U.S.-based businesses to be able to really do too much business in the non-domestic market is really just a sign that we are being left behind by more modern policies. And continuing to do so is going to put U.S.-based businesses at a significant disadvantage.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I'm getting deja vu and a little PTSD because we've seen that a lot in the crypto space, where a lot of other, countries and very popular you know, in the G20, there's a lot of different nations that are giving clarity. They're giving clear rules of the road on how to operate in that space, and we see that the U.S. is completely lagging behind. But hopefully, we can get our ducks in a row here soon, and we can do something on the MJ front, because I think it's a long time coming and way overdue. But I was going to get into the questions in the chat, but perhaps we'll save that for another time. But yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for doing that. That concludes today's interview. Thanks again for doing that, Morgan. That was a lot of fun, and I look forward to having you back on the show in the future if you're up for it, and as things progress there in Congress.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. You know, happy to talk anytime.
Yeah. Anything else you want to leave the comment? Any parting comments?
Other than just check out NORML.org, and you know, really encourage folks to not only contact their lawmakers but also donate to the cause. You know, this doesn't happen in a vacuum, and anybody that tells you that legalization is inevitable is not paying attention to the amount of work that has gone into getting us this far.
100%. Well, we appreciate all the work you're doing. Appreciate you for coming on the stream today, and I look forward to having you back on again in the future.
All right, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Morgan. Have a great night. Thanks, everybody. Going to end it there. If you could smash the like, I would appreciate it. Help support me in the channel. It doesn't cost you anything, and you can tick the bell. You'll be notified on any future videos or when I go live. Going to end it there. Have a great night, everybody, and we'll see you on the next video.